Hey everyone, welcome to the Software Blues on the agonies and ecstasies of creating ambitious artworks. So glad you could join us today. So this is a Babycastles production. Babycastles is an organization based out of New York City. They're a makerspace doing really incredible things for hello Babycastles, artists and developers and people that are being creative in New York City and the world. So this event wouldn't be put on without them, so thank you so much to them. Thank you for hosting me. So my name is Tyler Etters. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am in LA right now. I used to live in Chicago. The pandemic displaced me. I am out here right now. We're going to be talking about art today, and I wanted to give a little bit of context about myself because I think that helps sort of situate the discussion a little bit and give you a little bit of insight as to where I'm coming from. So this glorious dumpster fire of a chart was what I put together as my pitch for this talk, and this is essentially what my creative process is, and this is what we're going to be meandering through today together. We go from seeding an idea to letting it just sort of take root below the surface, tapping the idea, channeling, talking and listening to the idea, ultimately abandoning the idea, and then releasing your idea into the world. So this is I wanted to open it up to extend an invitation to you. So maybe think about a piece of art that you're working on right now, or you've been working on for a long time, or you've been thinking about working on, and maybe hold that in your mind as we go through this together and see if you can reflect a few of the things I'll be talking about inward towards this thing you've been working on. Towards the end, there's going to be a Q&A session, and then in the middle, there's going to be a brief intermission for more Q&A. So if you have a piece of art that you're stuck with or something that you're, having a hard time getting through, I'd love to have a discussion about that. We got some folks in chat, so I'll be monitoring chat the whole time, so this will be totally interactive. Cool. So I wanted to first primarily give a shout out to David Bales and Ted Orland. They wrote this book called Art and Fear, and it is probably one of the most influential books I've read about art in my life. And there's essentially two things they say are the artist's job. The first thing is to keep going, and then the second thing is to help others keep going. And that's why I'm giving this talk right now, because I want to help others keep going. And this is a fantastic book. Definitely pick it up. Okay, so ambitious. That's part of the title of this talk, on the agonies and ecstasies of creating ambitious artworks. So what is ambitious? What does that actually mean? There's really only one thing that it means to me, and there's really only one thing that's important to me, and that's, is it ambitious relative to you? Is it something that you are pushing yourself with, or something that's beyond your comfort zone, or something that you've never done before? I try not to compare myself to other artists or other musicians or other developers. When I think about ambitious, I think about, am I challenging myself, or am I growing? Am I doing something that I haven't done before that's going to push me further than I have in the past? So that's what this word means in the context of this talk. So I want to briefly just touch on my first few ambitious works and why they were ambitious, because I think it is a really interesting context for the subject of this talk and this creative process that we're going to be going through together. So my first ambitious work of art was a film I made in high school. I was like 13 or 14. Simply had the assignment to do a book report on any book you wanted. I chose A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, And the assignment was like write a paper or something, write like a 5-paragraph paper. I ended up making a 30-minute science fiction epic with special effects, and you can see in the screen I was doing two layers of videos, so like characters could be talking to themselves, and there were portals, and there were we did all these costumes. You know, I was doing costume design and doing film and doing all this stuff, and I was completely overcome with like joy and possessed by this thing, and it was in my head, and I just had to make it. And that was the first really ambitious work of art that I'd ever done, and that really spurred my love for a lot of the art that I practice today. I wrote music for this with my friend Pasha, writing the story, cinematography, all of it. So much so that I thought I wanted to become a filmmaker. That was my first piece of ambitious art. My second piece was music. So this is an album that Pasha and I created together. So it's Descent into Dreams. It was our first LP. We spent probably, 2 years making this. We were 18, 19-ish, maybe even 17. And this was another extremely ambitious work of art for us. We poured everything we had into it, countless hours. I would go on to make a lot more albums, and each one was ambitious for their own reasons. And again, ambitious for me, ambitious because I was trying to communicate something I'd never communicated before, using new technology that I hadn't used before, using new instruments that I hadn't used before. And each one I was pushing myself more and more. So then there's a few more ambitious works of art that I would chalk up to my roster of experiences. This is another one like the film I shared earlier. There's a school assignment that was simply take 12 photographs that are related. I extrapolated that and photographed the entire coast of Illinois from Wisconsin to Indiana along Lake Michigan. And I made like this huge sprawling project out of it, shot it on film, cross-processed it. And again, that was ambitious for me because I was really pushing myself. So then 2020 happens, and this has been a great year for art for me because art is something that I use to process my feelings and my emotions. And I've had a lot of those this year, to say the least. So I started another album, as I typically do, because that's my main medium. And while I was working on it, I wasn't really feeling inspired. I felt kind of bored. I felt kind of like I was just going back to doing the same old. And long story short, it just wasn't ambitious. And I like making ambitious art. And I knew I could make another album because I made, on that screenshot of music, there was 16 hours worth of music that I've made that were ambitious, and it just didn't feel that way anymore. So I didn't have the energy or excitement. And I started lamenting that maybe I was washed up, so to speak. Like I had nothing else to say, or there was nothing else relevant that I had to do. So I got pretty down on myself. And then I had this thought, what if my best work is ahead of me? And that really triggered something. And I got really curious, and I got really excited about what would that look like? What would that mean? So that, of course, brings us to Arcologies, which was my ambitious work of art for the year. Arcologies is a interactive environment for designing 2D soundscapes with Norns and grid. I designed these glyphs. These represent structures. You put structures on your grid, which is a type of instrument from mono. The structures talk to each other. They communicate with each other. You build interactive sound environments with this tool. This is a screenshot of someone using it from Instagram, Alaya Piana. You can see the Norns in the background there too. So the Norns is a sound computer with a screen on it. So this is ultimately like where it ended up. So we're going to talk about the journey, about how I got here. And this really brings us to our first hack, our first hack alert. So throughout this presentation, we're going to have these hacks that I share. So the first one is be inspired by your medium and not the content. I was no longer inspired by the medium of electronic music, and that non-interest translated to the content. I didn't feel that spark. I didn't feel that excitement. I didn't feel that engagement with it. And it's not that I didn't have anything to say. The medium was the issue. And I think that your medium is, and what do I mean by medium? It can be it simply means whatever you use to get your ideas and your art into the world. So it could be paint, it could be words, it could be code, it could be dance, it could be music, whatever that might be, that's your medium. So I really need to be in love with my medium. And from that will allow me to realize my ideas. So this year, after I was upset about, I was worried about not being able to write music, or maybe I wasn't going to write music anymore, I decided to get into the monome ecosystem of stuff. And I got really inspired by this as a medium, by Norns and Grid, and ultimately Lua, which is the code base that Arcologies is written in. Okay, so that was our context. That sort of situates us for where I'm at and where I'm coming from. So phase one of the creative process is seeding. So seeding is where you get your ideas. Seeding is the process of kind of gathering a bunch of raw materials that may one day be transmuted into something else. And this is a infographic of the internet. It's a visualization of it. Hyacinth Nil says, I do love Lua, smiley face. Yeah, Lua, I learned it this year. It's so good. It's so much fun. So the internet's a vast place. It's definitely one of my primary sources of inspiration. I use pinboard.in to bookmark things, and I'm always capturing interesting links and inspiration. I actually rarely go back and look at it. Just the act of bookmarking it keeps me actively looking for inspiring things. I have been privileged enough to be able to travel both for pleasure and work, and I photograph things everywhere I go. I keep a little travel blog on my website. It's always been really inspiring to me. So all these ideas are always just gathering, and I think it's important to acknowledge this as the first part of the creative process, because your ideas don't come from nowhere. My ideas don't come from nowhere. They always come from something. So one of the perils of this is sometimes you get bad ideas and sometimes sometimes the seeds just aren't gonna grow and they aren't gonna sprout. And sometimes the weather is gonna be poor and the seeds aren't gonna take. For example, I've always wanted to do earthworks, gigantic sculptures made out of dirt and steel and concrete. Doing that requires immense amounts of capital and land and earth moving equipment, and I have these ideas for them, but I'm never actually going to, well, I'm not going to say never, but the weather is not right for me to be able to do those things. So between bad seeds and poor weather, you need a lot of seeds, which brings us to our next hack, which is you can never plant too many seeds. So just keep gathering your ideas and keep stocking them up. Hello, the Daniel WH from Amsterdam. Welcome. Just getting started. So the seed for Arcologies was in the book The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Singh. And this book, completely incredible, highly recommend. It's about supply chains and how Matsutake mushrooms move about the world, are picked, are shipped, are consumed, are given. And I read this last year and I wrote down the phrase supply chain in my notes. Not sure what it was, thought it was maybe going to be an album, maybe a song. It ended up being Arcologies. It just goes to show you never really know what a seed might turn into. All right, so void. Void's the phase after seed, and that's, as I just said, you never really know what the seed's going to turn into. You never really know how long it's going to take for that seed to turn into something. One of my favorite quotes, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, from Buddha. You can never have too many seeds, and you never know when they're actually going to start taking root and sprouting. So this year, as I mentioned earlier, I was a bit of a pandemic refugee. I lived in Chicago. I got displaced to California. It's a long story, but California has been really incredible and alien to me because I'm a Midwesterner. I'm used to just seeing flat fields, and every time I see mountains in the distance, my stomach kind of jumps a little bit because it's so alien. And woke up to an earthquake the other night, so it's very different here. So that brings us to one of the perils of this phase, which is memory. You have all these seeds. Do you remember them? Are you going to be able to recall them when it's time to sit down with your work and practice your art? So hack alert, write that shit down. Writing it down is the first step into materializing it and manifesting it in the world. If you don't write it down, you're probably going to forget it. I'm probably going to forget it. There's some ideas that I sort of hold on to, and then they eventually just disintegrate. Who knows how many I've actually forgotten. I keep written journals like nearby at all times. I have a to-do app that I can dump quick ideas into. I've got markdown files in Dropbox. I want to make sure that I can always write down ideas when I have them. So this was the first time I actually, so I mentioned I wrote down supply chain when I read the book because that word was interesting. So this was the first time I actually wrote down what some of the ideas about what supply chain would become are. So this was on my iPad. I love sketching on my iPad because you sort of get syntax highlighting. You get different colors with different types of paintbrushes. So here I was starting to map out. I decided that this was going to be a program, so I was starting to map out some of the logic, some of the terms, some of the domains. I knew I wanted MIDI, and this was where things started crystallizing a bit. All right, phase 3, tapping. Babycastles ask, what's sketching software? That was, that's a great question. What was that? I don't remember what sketching software it is. I'll get back to you on that one. Sorry, my iPad's in the other room. So tapping is where you first tap your idea. You've written it down, you've waited, and it's time for this thing to sprout, and it's time for you to open the floodgates for the first time. So here, someone's tapping a maple tree for syrup. This is, to some folks, this is an extremely terrifying moment. It's when you have a blank canvas or a blank text editor or a blank stage or a blank roll of film, and it's time to write the first line of code and do the thing for the first time. This is one of my favorite moments because everything is possible right here, and you can create anything, and each character you write increasingly diminishes the end result of what you're going to create. So it is at this moment that the potential is the highest, and that's an electric and exciting moment. So one of the perils of this is looping, what I call looping, which is where you sort of flirt with this idea of yours over and over again, and you never actually get it into something that's more workable. I've got some ideas that I've flirted with for literally 10 years now, and I know they're just kind of drained of all their glow at this point because I haven't develop them enough, and I'm pretty sure that if I try to develop them anymore, there's just going to be nothing there. So now is the time to use that idea, and I have that idea in quotes because if you're anything like me, you typically always have an idea that's like the next thing you want to work on. when I was younger, I used to save that idea. I used to save it for someday. Someday I'll be ready to make that thing or do that piece of work or do that painting. That day is always now, because that's the thing that is most exciting to you. And if you're afraid of it right now, that's all the more reason that you need to run towards it, because that's where the growth is going to happen. So don't save your best ideas for later. There's always more ideas. Use that idea right now. Another one of the perils of the stage, of the tapping stage, is your idea might be a dud. So some ideas just suck, and you've got to have the courage to just say, you know, this really isn't fun, or this really isn't doing it for me, or this sounds awful, or this looks awful. Just cut your losses and move on. It's okay. So this brings us to the first threshold, and this is a screenshot from the Never-Ending Story. This is one of the thresholds that Atreyu has to pass through, and I feel like, to me, this threshold is a good metaphor for successfully jumping over that empty canvas and to a point that you're curious and you're excited, and it's something that you can see that you might want to put your name on someday, that you might want to say, yeah, this is it, this is the thing. And it's a scary moment, because once you pass through this threshold, you've sort of made an implicit commitment to your piece and to yourself to keep going a bit further. So it's really comfortable to kind of just not go there and not look at it, which was what leads to looping. But you just go through. It's okay. You can always stop. So this was the first threshold for Arcologies. It originally actually started out as a Max for Live and JavaScript program before I moved to Lua. The commit date on this, May 24th, was my first commit. I just had simply 2 files. With code, I feel like Git is a really important alibi and accomplice and ally and sidekick with you. It helps keep you on track. It saves your butt when you accidentally do some silly things with your code. It gives you a history of everything. So I see Git as kind of the fun, quirky sidekick that's along for the ride on all of your development projects. And this to me represented going through that first threshold, because I made the initial commit and it was something that was cool and it was working and my grid was lighting up and I was ready to keep going. All right, so we're at our first intermission. We've gone through 3 phases right now: seed, void, and tap. Are there any questions so far, or anything anyone wants more clarity on? Wish I knew the name of that piece of music software or drawing software. Yeah, the Daniel WH asks, how many seeds do you have planted at once these days as in undeveloped concepts? Tens, hundreds, thousands. I probably have around 100 that are immediately recallable. By immediately recallable, I mean I have an application called Things. It's for iOS and Mac, and it's like a to-do list manager. And I've got like a music project and an art project, and then inside each of those I have sub projects, and they're just like one-line ideas, maybe song titles or sketches of songs, or let's see, like sometimes I'll do thought I had I'll start like, an idea can be as simple as just a little tiny sketch like this, and in my internal logic, my internal mind, I know what I was talking about here. In this case, this is what would become Markov music, which is some music software I wrote that makes music with Markov chains. So yeah, there's probably about 100 that are kind of at that stage. And then if you count all of my journal entries and every kind of passing fleeting thought, it's a lot more than that. Infinite Digits asks, do you have other book recommendations? Those two you mentioned, Art and Fear and the Mushroom at the End of the World, sound interesting. Yeah, the third book that I would recommend is On Writing by Stephen King. And I've got a list of recommended books at the end of this slide deck, which I'll share with y'all once this is over. Actually, I can just drop it in chat right now. On Writing is really incredible because it's coming from Stephen King, one of the most accomplished writers of our time. Whether or not you like his work is another question. I adore his work, so I enjoyed the book a lot. But he talks about the discipline aspect of your practice and why that's so important, and we'll touch on that a little bit in channeling. Oh, well, that's the only one you've mentioned that I've read. It's amazing. Agreed. Yeah, I love that book. And Linda Irene says, yay, new reading list. Hi, Mom. Infinite Digits says, I have one more question, but I'll wait till the end. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll do some more questions at the end. And then, all right, let's keep going. All right, so you've tapped your idea, and now it's time to channel it. For me, channeling has only become more intense as I've gotten older, which was something that I was worried about would go the other way, that I'd sort of it'd either get harder or I wouldn't be able to do it as well. And for me, I call it channeling because it really is like I'm not in control of my body or my mind. It's like something's coming through me. Even this talk, I sort of feel that way. Like this talk always existed and I'm just channeling it. So to me, it's about letting go, and it's about not being concerned with controlling the outcome. It's about trusting yourself. It's about believing in yourself and your intuition. And with software development, this is particularly challenging because software development requires such a broad body of knowledge to work. Compared to something like painting, there's a broad body of knowledge that you can draw on from painting, but ultimately you can put paint on a brush and put it on a canvas, and you're going to make a mark. You're going to start creating art. With software, you need to have development environment set up. You need to have the right language chosen. You need to have version control. There's all these things that you need to have ready. So it's definitely a much more difficult thing to do when you're developing software, but it's really important to tend to that and to create an environment that is conducive to that. So self-doubt is a really big peril here, and that's going to happen when you're not sure of yourself, or you're afraid, or you don't believe in yourself. I think the biggest antidote to this is to seek support and to offer support. So back to Art and Fear, the second charge of the artist is to help others keep going. And I think that if you can give back and help those in your immediate circle keep going, that's an incredible gift that you can give people, and that ultimately helps you too. It's kind of like a virtuous circle. Distractions are another big peril right here, and the only way to really solve that one is through discipline. So that's putting the time in. That's I believe inspiration is kind of a trap. There really isn't such thing as inspiration. Inspiration is sort of this myth that you're just going to be struck with inspiration and you're going to be able to go and do the thing. I believe you just have to show up. This is what Stephen King talks about in On Writing. You just have to show up and do your work and put the time in, and then the good art's going to come out of that. So another big peril here is the materials. I mentioned that software development's really especially challenging because the materials, you have this whole tool chain that you have to have built up. So you need to be comfortable and you need to tend to your space. This is what my development space looks like for Norns and Grid. It's minimal, everything's within arm's reach, it's comfortable. It sounds silly, but invest in a healthy chair. I sit in this chair from 8 to 16 hours a day. Invest in a keyboard that works. It doesn't have to be a really expensive keyboard, but it should be one that works if you're going to be typing thousands of lines of code. You need to have tools and medium that you actually enjoy touching and enjoy working with, because it's your interface to your art. Same goes with your development environment. So, I use Sublime Text and iTerm2 and ZSH. I made the switch to ZSH when Mac OS all moved off of Bash to ZSH. I was kind of agitated by that, but I was like, you know what? I might as well just learn whatever the latest and greatest is. And I actually like it more than Bash. So staying current on all of this stuff, if you're developing software, is important. You want to have aliases set up to get your environment going really quickly. Infinite Dizage says, "Oh, my ZSH autocomplete is 100% win." Yes. There's a lot of things to like about Oh My ZSH, and I treat all that stuff as with care. I have my ZSH profile saved as GitHub gists, so if I jump to different computers or I have to format my computer, my computer crashes, I can easily recall them. Need to make sure that I have aliases that I like. All that stuff is part of your craft, and it's not trivial. And you can fall into a trap of endlessly tweaking your environment. So I find it healthy to sort of commit to something and just stick with it. Also, the solarized dark scheme is essential for media art. Yeah, so this theme, I intentionally bought a theme. This was like $10. I bought it so that I wouldn't mess with it or like want to go out and go theme hunting and shopping for a whole bunch of time and spend a bunch of time making a theme. I just bought a theme for $10 and this is what I use and this is my theme, end of story. So anyways, all that to say is I'm really comfortable with my materials and I look forward to sitting down and coding because everything works, all my packages are updated, I like my software. Okay, cool. All right, so you're doing your thing, you're making your work, you're painting your painting, you're writing your book, you're coding your piece. Now it's time for phase 5, which is what I call communion. So if you have the pleasure of working with code, your code is probably one of the only mediums that is literally talking to you all the time. As you can see here, we have a syntax error on line 14 that says, "Hello, Tyler, you are not listening to me." It's kind of hilarious how much of a dialogue you're having with your code the whole time. But it's true with other mediums too. And that's a peril because you need to listen to what your medium is telling you. And here's a picture of my cat Bunting. He's very pleased with himself because he got into some bubble wrap and he built a fort and he was rolling around in it. And this is a perfect metaphor for how I feel kind of once I emerge from that delirious ecstasy of creation and I go, what the heck? I'm very pleased with myself because I've got this crazy thing that I built around me and I'm moving things here and I'm doing stuff here. But there's stuff, you have to listen to what your medium's telling you because it's always whispering things. And if you don't, you risk a loss of vision. You risk not remembering what that initial seed was. It's okay if your idea changes or the vision changes, but for me, I need to have a core something that I'm trying to do or trying to communicate. And if I forget that or lose that, I'm going to lose interest in the project, and I'm ultimately going to fail, and I'm going to kill it. So Hack Alert used established processes and techniques. There's a lot of people that have tread these waters before, and they've figured out how to do these things. With Arcologies, I use a simplified one-man Kanban board with Trello. I kind of explicitly switch between product manager and developer roles, and this helps me stay in tune with my vision. So I'll have a epic for a big feature set, and I'll break that into moderately small issues that I can get done in a single day. I have a release checklist. I'm using the lightest version of Agile possible because I'm just one person, so it doesn't need to be too complicated, but this helps keep me on the rails. And I can't recommend this enough if you're developing software. So here's where a feedback loop happens between channel and communion. And this is where probably a majority of the loop occurs, or a majority of the time in creating artwork happens. Seeding happens kind of instantaneously. The void, you have no idea how long that's going to be. Tapping is usually an hour or two. The feedback and channel cycle can be days, weeks, months, years if you're doing something really ambitious and large. So this isn't just a linear thing. It's an act of creating and listening and creating and listening. Hyacinth Noah asked, is there a template for that board? No, there's not, but I'd be happy to share that too. I can tweet that out later. It's basically the standard Trello to do, doing, done. But then I've also got something for like next release, and I have like a release template that helps me make sure my deployment pipeline's set up. So getting out of this feedback loop is perilous, and this gets to the second threshold, which this is another screenshot from Neverending Story. So here we have Atreyu staring at the ice mirror, staring at the reflection of himself. You can get trapped in this feedback loop and sort of stay there forever. And I feel like it's especially dangerous for development because there's always new technology coming out, and there's always more things that can be done. So I guess that's why the loss of vision is important to see as a peril, because you can forget what your initial vision was when you're in this feedback loop. So you sort of need a way to like pull yourself out and say, wait. The whole point of this application was just to do this one thing, or this was supposed to be a 2-song EP, not a 10-song double album. So being able to like sort of keep your goals in mind is the trick here. Because ultimately you have to abandon your work. And abandon is a very sad and violent word, but it is a very sad and violent moment. Because the peril, if you don't abandon, is overworking. And different mediums have different tolerances to overworking. So dance and performance, for example, are utterly ephemeral. They're instantly over, which I think is totally beautiful. Sculpture, if you work with marble, you can chisel away until there's nothing left but dust. With watercolors, it gets to a point where the paper literally cannot hold any more pigment. So this gets back to your medium's talking to you, it's telling you things. But once you cross into digital art, so recording digital music, making film, writing a novel, software, it's literally endless. You're only constrained by how much hard drive space you have. And that's like a very dangerous trap that we have to navigate. How many times have you resaved your file, new version, final, 01, final, it just, you have to be able to abandon it at some point. And it really is abandoning. It's not, it's talking to you and it tells you when it thinks it's done, but you have to be comfortable letting go and moving on. With Arcologies, I actually had to abandon it twice. First time I had to abandon it was the Max for Live version of it because the application essentially grew so big that it was non-responsive, which I think I'm going to chalk up to me being a poor JavaScript developer. So here you can see that Max is at 100% CPU usage. And to add to that, I was having technical difficulties and I had beta testers and there was a lot of issues with the beta testers. So I had to make the very painful decision to abandon it. And this brings me to my favorite quote, the number one thing I learned in college: sometimes you just have to shoot the baby, Professor Roy Corner. So I was working in on a marketing campaign and I had just been tormented over it for days, and he watched me struggle through this and he just kind of walked up to me and he just uttered these words, and I knew what I had to do. I just had to start over. So thank you, Roy. These words have stayed with me. So I had to yeet back all the way to the tap phase, literally throwing out hundreds and hundreds of hours worth of work on Arcologies because I still believed in the vision and still believed in the idea. But I had to abandon, and instead of actually abandon and release, I abandoned and went back to tap and started over in a different language on an entirely different platform. Had I not done that, I would probably, one of two things would have happened. I would have continued working on Arcologies in the Max for Live version indefinitely, or I would have always sadly wondered, what if I had finished that thing? I would have kind of sat unfinished in my GitHub. And that's the peril of attachment. If you get too attached to your work, you will never actually do what needs to be done. There's always more though. So this is sort of a hack, but this is more of a truism. So there's always another piece. There's always a new patch. There's always a new medium. There's always the software going to be a new bug to fix, or a new piece of DLC, or a sequel. I come from a music background, so you finish an album, you go on tour, you start sharing it with people, you do performances. There's always more, and this idea that once you finish something, it's dead is sort of a I don't think it's a very helpful way to think about it. There's always more for you to create after you're finished. So no, this is not the end, but the beginning. All right, so prep your questions. We've got one more stage, talk about releasing, and I'll do some more Q&A. Spent about 45 minutes. Great, we're right on time. All right, so lastly, it's time to release. So the just one more thing peril is especially dangerous with software, but I think it applies to most mediums. Just one more thing. I just want to change one more thing. I just want to rename this one thing, or I want to move this here, or one more feature, or I want to fix the shadows on this one thing, or this one fill is a little off, or this sample's wrong. You can do that forever and ever and ever and ever. So you have to give yourself an unpleasant deadline, just slightly unpleasant. Just, if you have the benefit of working with other artists, you can use them as your accountability partners to help you stay honest about when you say you're going to get something done. For me with Arcologies, I scheduled the launch stream before I scheduled and started marketing the launch stream before the software was actually done. So I was confident that I could get something packaged and ready to go in time for it, but I scheduled it just a little bit before I knew I would be comfortable. It's really great to sort of trick yourself like this and to either, schedule an event to release it, or, schedule a performance, or do something anchored in the real world outside of your own head. So deployment, this is particular or specific only to software, but if you wait until the very end of your project to understand how to get it deployed, you're going to have a bad time. Hyacinth Nil says, gonna throw this in here. I accidentally scheduled the release of the game and my wedding within a week of each other. Sad. Yeah, that's that must have been a really fun week. How did that go for you? So, if you're aspiring to publish your games on, I don't know, itch.io, or if you're aspiring to publish your games on Steam, or even just releasing on GitHub, you need to know how to get your code packaged and ready and able to be downloaded by someone else, because after you do your last save and commit, you're not just done. There's all this other stuff that needs to happen. The Monome ecosystem is awesome, and it's actually really simple to get stuff in the Norns library. It's a simple pull request to their central library, and then that's all it takes. You just add a little bit of JSON and you're done. But I still had to test it. I still had beta testers. So before I released Arcologies, I made a very small application called Dronecaster. It's only a couple hundred lines. It just simply makes a drone at a certain hertz, and you can change the drone voice. So it's written in Super Collider. But I did this first to make sure I knew what that whole process was like, because I didn't want to be learning it for Arcologies, which was orders of magnitude larger and more complicated. So yeah, hack alert, know your deployment pipeline ahead of time, know what it takes to get your software packaged up and in the format that it needs to be for other people. And you can either do that with little throwaway applications, just little tiny spikes, or seek mentors, seek people that have done it before, ask for help, get support there, because it's a really important piece. With other mediums, a lot of these problems are solved now. Getting music on Spotify is pretty easy, but getting it mixed and mastered kind of isn't. You might just be used to making music yourself at home, but if you want to get mixed and mastered, there's a whole process around that too. Yeah, so then let it get back to you. This is a newer one that I'm just starting to learn more about. I have a tendency to finish something and then immediately go on to whatever the next thing is. And I've started intentionally trying to pause and let the thing that I've created give something back to me. So in the case of Arcologies, interestingly enough, I hadn't expected this, but I learned streaming because of Arcologies. Up until the beginning of this month, I'd never used OBS before. I didn't stream anything on Twitch. Since then, I've streamed a dozen times. I'm sharing this with you all, and I really enjoy doing this. And it's just really cool that I never would have anticipated this would have happened, but it's what the piece needed. It needed me to be able to share this with people, and it needed to be able to breathe a little bit differently. And it opened up all these new skills that I've learned, and I really enjoy. And honestly, it kind of goes all the way back to that first film I shared. I've always been interested in film, so this is given back to me in this way. And then also Arcologies has inspired a lot of people to make a lot of really cool music, so that's been tremendously enjoyable to just listen to what other people are doing. Other people have taught me things about the application I don't know about. They've submitted feature requests that have been really fun to make that I never would have thought of. So it's been really rewarding to sort of receive back from the work. Outside of this piece, with music, it's really, performances are where I see performances as sort of like the time that I get to give more. Performances are sort of like an offering. It's like creating a space for people to be in, but it's also a way to share this with you all. So I think there's analogs other places. And reflecting, just, did you enjoy what you did? Is it something you want to do again? Is it something you're still curious about? What would you have done differently? If you're a solo artist and you're not in a band or something, giving yourself the time and space to reflect is important. So that about wraps us up. This is the hack digest. So this is all of the hacks from the presentation all in one nice little nifty page. And here's further information. So the 3 books I mentioned, and we've got some links to different stuff of mine, Babycastles, of course. And yeah, that about wraps it up. So here's the link to the presentation. You can go ahead and download that, share it, and then very happy to take any questions, anything that stood out or didn't make sense, or anything that was helpful. Infinite Digits says, great talk, thank you. You've articulated a lot of things I've experienced. I think it'll help with my process. Yeah, you're welcome. Infinite Digits, I love your work, and it's been really cool following it. So I'd love to talk more about that sometime. Daniel H has a quick question. It's a rambling one. I love rambling ones. Oh, Daniel, you're also in LA? That's cool. Maybe we could hang out if we're ever allowed to do that again. I've only hung out with one person since this all started besides my wife, and it was in the parking lot of a Whole Foods 6 feet away from each other wearing masks. And then I was buying a piece of music gear off of him. It was Peter, and we had a great visit, but then he moved to the Pacific Northwest, and I was really sad because I made a friend and then he moved away. But that's a really good saying. Commonly in software land, they say that if you are embarrassed at V1, you waited too long. Yeah, I think it's okay to be embarrassed about some of the implementations in the code, but I think you ought to be proud of the user experience, because if the user experience is a train wreck, people aren't going to like it and they're going to have a bad time. Like if you watch some of the launch streams or my developer stream going over some of the code, there's some parts where I was like, don't look at that, just skip that. We don't talk about that part. And it's not until now, a month later, that I actually fixed it. Anyway, do you think that advice holds for media art, or does that risk compromising the vision? I think that's where support is really important, and having trusted mentors or other musicians or artists working in your same medium that you can talk to about those things and that you can share unfinished stuff with. I think that's really, really important, because it's really hard to do it alone, and being able to bounce your ideas, and sometimes just talking aloud to someone helps you a lot process things yourself. So Infinite Digits asked, hey Gigi, you want to stream with me? You want to talk about art? You mentioned having a lot of idea seeds, so you've likely tried initiating lots of ideas. You also mentioned the difficulty in starting an idea in software versus something like painting. My question is, do you have any tricks to test a software idea before surmounting a steep learning curve required to execute the idea? For example, I had an idea around Super Collider, which was new to me, but I couldn't figure out how to quickly try the idea without learning a hell of a lot about Super Collider. By the way, I also used your Dronecaster script to end up learning Super Collider, which is why I submitted thanks. Yeah, make spikes. So spikes are, in software development jargon, spikes are a small time-boxed experiment to see if something works. So I do spikes all the time. I'll do a spike whenever I'm learning a new language, a new feature, a new command, a new something. make a spike. So a spike is a disposable throwaway piece of software that is meant just only for your learning. So say I'm going to spend 1 hour learning if I can make one of the spikes I did for Arcologies was the scale library. I was skeptical and afraid of the scale library. It's a wonderful library. I had no reason to be, but it just felt really scary to have to work with all these different musical scales. How's it going to be indexed? How's it going to look? How am I going to be able to access all this information? So I just created a new file, included the music scale library, and just started experimenting with it. And I learned it in 10 minutes or something. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Delete that code, and then you're good to start again. So don't do something big or new or risky inside your piece of software. Create a spike outside of it that's disposable, that's not connected to anything else. And that's a really safe and good way to learn new stuff. But yeah, I always test an idea like that outside of my main project. Babycastles asks, what advantages do you find in Lua, or how do you choose your language/libraries? So Lua was chosen for me because that's what Norns uses. I was pretty nervous about learning it because I haven't learned a net new language in a long time, but I love Lua. It's my favorite language now. So that decision was made for me because the hardware it's what the whole thing runs on. So that wasn't really a decision. But before that, like with Max, MSP, and JavaScript was the only language I really knew, and Max was something I intentionally wanted to learn. Never heard that perfect idea. Time box equals time limit. Yeah, for spikes. So you can either set a 2-hour time limit, or the end of the week time limit, or a date or something like that. I'm going to give myself permission to learn this new thing until Saturday, and I'm only going to learn this one thing, and then I'll be able to make more decisions, because it's all about just chipping away at the knowledge a little bit, and not trying to swallow the whole thing at once. Also, having done Norns and Lewis stuff myself, did you end up writing lots of your own UI and helper libraries to fill in the sparse API, find other stuff from the Lua community on GitHub, and submit things back to Norns? Yeah, I wrote a ton of UI helpers. If you check out the graphics, it's not a class because Lua doesn't actually have classes. The graphics file, I'm getting a link to it. I wrote a whole bunch of stuff in here to make working with the UI simpler. To draw a line on Norns, it actually takes 4 separate function calls. You have to set a screen level, you have to move to a XY position, you have to draw the line, you have to stroke it. So I wrapped all those in one function so I could just quickly draw a line with 4 parameters. So I really like making things like that to make development more pleasing. I had so much help from the Lines and Lua community to get this thing done. I haven't submitted a whole lot back to Norns itself. I've opened a couple issues here and there, but I still feel like I'm not quite at a place where I can submit meaningful code back to the main Norns branch. I'm still understanding the whole ecosystem and how the whole thing works. But I try to give back on the forum whenever I can and help people out. Well, we're at the top of the hour. So this has been great. Thanks so much for all the questions, and thanks for hanging out. You've got my contact info. Thanks again to Babycastles for hosting me and putting this on. Please go support them. They're doing amazing things for the community. So tickets are on a sliding scale of $5 to $15 of a suggested donation. Highly recommend you throw some money their way. Lately, I was checking out their website. They're doing stuff around helping organizers protect their identity in protests, and I just think that's really important work that needs to happen these days. So mad props to them for doing the work that needs to happen, and give them a follow. I went to, what was it? I went to a Babycastles event 2 or 3 weeks ago about, I think it was tidal cycles. So I got an introduction to that. Yeah, they've got just awesome content always coming out. So thank you so much, Hyacinth Nil and Lee, for inviting me on and letting me do this. Thanks everyone for hanging out. Oh yeah, and they've also got a residency. So I think you jump on that, you get a, what's it called? A stipend, or you get monies to do your thing and make cool art for them. All right, thanks for hanging out. We're gonna archive this on YouTube for future viewers, and appreciate you all. Have a great day. Keep creating. Don't give up.